If you're one of at least 14.5 million non-elderly Filipinos living with comorbidities, you'll be prioritized for the COVID-19 vaccine. What are these illnesses and why should these individuals be on the priority list? Here on MedTalk Health Talk, we'll talk about these comorbidities, how they affect individuals, and why these conditions can increase the risk of severe illness for COVID-19. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez. You're watching CNN Philippines. At the very beginning of the pandemic, experts concluded that people with comorbidities are at higher risk of COVID-19. They also found that certain types of comorbidities are even more vulnerable to severe COVID. Today, those living with these chronic conditions can register and receive the vaccine now. Let's welcome our guest for today. We have Dr. Cheridin Oro Josef. She's a family and geriatric medicine specialist from the Marikina Doctors Hospital and Medical Center. We're also joined by Dr. Romel Punong Bayer. He's a primary care internist and hypertension specialist from the Medical City, Clark, Pampanga. Thank you both for joining us here on the program, Doc Cherry and Doc Ome. So, 14.5 million non-elderly Filipinos are suffering from comorbidities. And we want to first explain what comorbidities are talaga. Dr. Cherry, can you help us there?
Comorbidities po are in the presence of one or two or more diseases, no? in the person. So ito po yung may kasamang mga iba't ibang sakit o isang tao ay may iba-iba pang klaseng sakit, hindi lang po isa, or meron siyang sakit which is chronic, it's a long-term illness which requires medication.
Okay, so someone with a comorbidity is more likely to suffer from severe COVID-19 as well. Therefore, they need to get protected as soon as possible. But given the limited supply of vaccines, the health department named several kinds of comorbidities that are eligible for vaccination right now. And they fall under priority eligible group A3. So, Dr. Cherry, what are the comorbidities that are given priority?
So, the diseases that is given priorities are those of cardiovascular diseases, those with chronic kidney diseases, and those who have malignancies or cancer patients, and diabetes.
The IITF explains that these are the groups that are considered at high risk of severe COVID-19, and we'll explain some of these conditions today. Chronic respiratory diseases remain widespread in the country, with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD among the top 10 leading causes of mortality. Dr. Ome, please break down for us the different chronic respiratory diseases and how exactly do they affect a person's ability to breathe?
Looking at the respiratory chronic respiratory diseases, these are mostly the asthma, the bronchial asthma, the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is composed of emphysema and chronic bronchitis, your cystic fibrosis, and your pulmonary hypertension. These conditions will have an abnormality in the respiratory tract, and there is already an anatomic and physiologic abnormality due to chronic or long-term inflammation of the airways, and more so, there is an impaired immune system in the cellular level and in the more complex immune system of these patients with chronic respiratory diseases.
So, Doc Ome, that was a good explanation on what COPD is and yung mga lung diseases na kasama sa comorbidities. So, if you think about it, a person with these conditions already has difficulty breathing, all the more so if they're infected with COVID-19 because it is a respiratory disease. Ngayon, Doc Ome, ang tanong ko is, bakit itong mga comorbidities ang napili para maging priority dito sa listahan ng mga babakunahan?
Actually, just to give a very short discussion about how the vaccine process is being carried out. First, there are three objectives of vaccination: to lessen morbidity and mortality, to decrease transmission, and to go back to normal. And we can see that this chronic condition are seen in earlier studies that are high risk to be hospitalized and die because their respiratory tract is already open to this microorganism that might cause the disease.
So if you start to feel any of these symptoms, please consult your doctor right away for diagnosis and proper treatment and the proper selection if you are qualified to get the vaccine. Ang tanong ko kay Dr. Cherry, what happens when someone with a chronic respiratory disease contracts COVID-19?
Una-una, we have to understand how the COVID-19 affects a person. So mainly because of the respiratory system. Patients with chronic respiratory diseases will already have experienced difficulty of breathing, coughing, and all those respiratory symptoms. So I am asthmatic. I know how it feels to have dyspnea and to have that wheezing. Even if for a simple viral infection or a simple bacterial infection, they will already have these symptoms. So for patients who already have a lung problem, meron ka ng problema sa paghinga, tapos nagkaroon ka pa ng infection mula sa bacteria or a virus, and for example, the COVID-19, it will be more difficult for you kasi exaggerated na nga yung lung functionality and pathophysiology ng disease sa atin.
That's right. And another comorbidity that qualifies for early vaccination or the A3 category is hypertension. Now, hypertension affects approximately 7 million Filipinos over the age of 20. That's 16% of our population. And many people with high blood pressure don't even know they do have it. So that's why this condition is commonly known as a silent killer. Now, Doc Ome, what are some of the warning signs ng isang taong may hypertension or high blood?
So mostly the patients with uncontrolled hypertension or hypertension for that matter complains of frequent neck pain and headache. But otherwise, as you have said a while ago, most of the patients with early hypertension or even late-stage hypertension doesn't have symptoms. That's the difficult part. Many of us are already hypertensive and we don't know it yet. So I advise everyone, if you have family history or risk factor for hypertension, you might as well take your blood pressure.
Now, Dr. Ome, in vaccination centers, those with a comorbidity of hypertension should not forget to take their hypertensive maintenance medications before they go. But there is some question on the vaccine sites na minsan they get turned away because their blood pressure is too high or at a certain point. How can they minimize this situation, Dr. Ome?
Actually, that's the reason why we at the Philippine Society of Hypertension and the Philippine Heart Association is encouraging everyone to continue your medications, especially if you are scheduled for a vaccination, to lessen this situation of being not given the vaccine because of a high blood pressure. If your hypertension is not controlled, you are really at risk, more at risk for contacting the disease because you are in a pro-inflammatory state.
Now, 1 in 6 Filipinos suffer from a heart disease naman. In fact, it's the leading cause of mortality in the country. And the ongoing pandemic puts these Filipinos at risk of severe illness. Could you tell us what are some of the different types of heart diseases na kasama dito, Doc Ome?
Actually, most of these heart diseases are the usual, the hypertension, cardiomyopathy, post-ischemic heart disease, and other diseases which are seen by the cardiologists.
Okay. Now, Dr. Cherry, how can those living with these heart diseases best manage their conditions during these times? Alam naman natin, maraming natatakot pumunta sa mga ospital ngayon.
So number one po, ang hypertension po is affected also by our perception of the blood pressure. Minsan po kaya tumataas ang blood pressure when we are at the vaccination site because we are very anxious. Okay, because of so many things that we have read in social media. I have received calls of patients asking me to give them clearance while they are inside the vaccination site because their BP is high. Okay, so number one, you have to relax. You have to be calm as always. Number two, you have to take your medications diligently. Number three, of course, diet and exercise all the time has to be practiced, or healthy lifestyle change yung tinatawag natin.
Obesity and diabetes are two other comorbidities on the government's vaccine priority list. More on these conditions after a short break. Stay with us on MedTalk Health Talk, only here on CNN Philippines. Welcome back to the show. MedTalk Health Talk is your partner in healthcare. Now, as the government continues to roll out COVID-19 vaccines, the Health Department released a list of comorbidities that are eligible for early vaccination. Today, we talk about these comorbidities and why they should be prioritized. Over 6 million Filipinos are diagnosed with diabetes, and the prevalence of this condition is steadily increasing, leaving many at risk of severe COVID-19. Dr. Ome, let's discuss why people with type 1 as well as type 2 diabetes more so are more likely to get those severe symptoms of COVID-19.
Being a diabetes, even a type 1 or type 2, will make the patient really immunocompromised. Why? Because there are multifactorial reasons why the type 1 and type 2 diabetics are immunocompromised. The hyperglycemia or the elevated sugar impair the immunity of these patients. Specifically, they affect the cells that fight this virus, this bacteria. The blood flow to the organs is already poor, and even the mechanism by which the cellular killing of this microorganism is already impaired if you have diabetes.
Okay, that's right. Now, if uncontrolled, diabetes can lead to serious complications like stroke, heart attack, as well as severe COVID. Doc Ome, what typically happens if a diabetic contracts COVID-19?
Looking at the earlier studies, we can see that these patients, because of their immune status, acquires the disease and become very severe and they die easily. That's why we really want these diabetics to be vaccinated and their sugars to be controlled in order for that risk to be lessened.
That's right, because diabetes is a disease that can be managed. And if properly controlled, risk of severe illness from other conditions as well as COVID-19 will significantly be lower. Dr. Cherry, what are ways to manage diabetes naman, especially now during the pandemic?
So when we talk about sugar, we have to think about the food that we eat. So diet is number one. So you have to lessen your carbohydrate and your simple sugar intake. Okay. Number two, you have to still do exercise, like walking. Even if you are at home, you have to walk, you have to do exercise. And please do not sit down for more than 3 hours. Most of us, of course, are just watching TV or in our gadgets or in a couch lying down. But we have to stand up, walk, stretch, and exercise so that you exert energy and you actually burn up some of those calories and some of those sugars that you eat.
Here's something that you keep hearing about already, but we want to emphasize this. For diabetics, it's really important to commit to a better diet and daily exercise because your activity will promote better blood sugar levels, blood lipid control, as well as your mood. And the more you exercise, the higher your energy levels will be, and that's what you need day in and day out. Now, diabetes, meanwhile, is often associated with obesity. Obese people are 80 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Dr. Cherry, how is obesity a problem during the period of COVID-19?
Okay, remember, obesity is also multifactorial. Now, if you are obese, if you have very high fat in your body, we say bad fat, for example, it affects most of your circulatory system, your cardiovascular system. So if you're obese, you are at high risk for developing cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and other multi-organ functions. If you're obese, other organs, most of the organs in your body are really affected. So it will it will be a risk factor for most other illnesses.
Now, we'll go over other comorbidities on the Health Department's priority list for vaccination against COVID-19. Keep it right here on MedTalk Health Talk, your connection to healthcare. You're watching CNN Philippines. With over 14.5 million Filipinos living with comorbidities, a priority group was determined while the government works on increasing the supply of vaccines. The priority group consists of a number of comorbidities, which puts these individuals with those comorbidities at even higher risk of catching severe COVID. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. Earlier, we talked about diabetes 2, as well as hypertension. And these can lead to chronic kidney disease, which is part of that list. Now, Dr. Ome, how can chronic kidney disease affect someone if they contract COVID-19? And how can we prevent chronic kidney disease as well?
Being a chronic kidney disease patient already puts you at risk for this COVID-19 because you are already in a pro-inflammatory state. Your immune system is very reactive, but the problem with CKD patient is that they cannot clear these inflammatory cytokines that is being produced.
Now, Dr. Cherry, you mentioned, you touched on cancer and malignancy early on, and this is again also part of the list ng IATF. How can those with cancer cope in the middle of this pandemic? Because it can be really stressful for those.
Those with cancer have very poor immune system response. So they have, because they are either on a chronic chemotherapeutic agents, and their metabolism is also very, very fast. Okay, so those patients with cancer, they're somehow immunocompromised because their medication is mainly addressing the inflammatory process that's going on in their bodies. So if this is already down, if COVID, or not just COVID, if other infections will set in, they'll truly get it. They're very, very vulnerable.
That's right. Now, Dr. Cherry, as a reminder to our viewers, can you inform them, for those who fit into this category, those with cancer and malignancy, ano ang dapat conditions para mabigyan sila ng vaccine?
Number one, we have to talk to our oncologists if we are okay to have the vaccine, because each one of you may be on chemotherapeutic agents right now, or most of you are already not into the agents anymore because you are stable at the moment. So if you are not taking any active treatment and you ask your oncologist for clearance, then it's okay for you to have the vaccine, because it's very important that your immune system will be able to fight against the COVID-19 or the vaccine itself. Because if you do not have enough good immune system, even if you're given the vaccine, you might not be able to develop antibodies for the COVID-19.
Now, a very common situation now is that of the mental health of people. This pandemic can be really stressful, and a lot of stress can indeed even lower your immune system. Pero bakit hindi kasama ang mental health dito sa mga categories na binibigay ng IATF? Dr. Ome, what's your opinion on this?
We are talking a while ago, Dr. Freddy, that mental health is really very widespread. But in earlier studies, I think this condition is not really adequately studied to become a risk factor for COVID-19. However, certain psychiatric condition can be immunocompromising or a risk factor for an immunocompromising disorder such as diabetes. I think we have to really give a proper evaluation of our diagnosed psychiatric patient, and probably we can give a medical certificate to them, and the vaccinator might as well consider it if they see that the condition is really immunocompromised.
Okay, very good. Now, Dr. Ome, we talked about chronic kidney disease earlier. I'd like to ask, how can those with CKD manage during this pandemic situation, especially those who need dialysis?
For the chronic kidney disease patients, especially those on dialysis, we continue doing your dialysis with recommended health protocol or health measures. Because when your creatinine will become high, this will further impair your immune system, being more prone to contacting COVID-19.
Now, individuals living with various comorbidities that we have been talking about are more vulnerable to other comorbidities and at high risk of severe illness from COVID-19. That is why they are the priority in the vaccination rollout. But until we reach herd immunity, which means 70% of our population or more, let's do our part to protect ourselves as well as those around us. Thank you, family and geriatric medicine specialist Dr. Cheridin Oro Josef, and primary care internist and hypertension specialist Dr. Romel Punungbayan. We thank you so much for your time. We hope that our conversation today was very helpful to you all. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and thank you for watching MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines.